Before we begin, it's important to share our code of conduct for AWSN. It is the same code of conduct for face-to-face meetings as it is for online events. We are dedicated to creating a safe environment for all participants. If there's any problems, you see there the board's email address, please raise it with them. They'll be only too happy to sort things out for you if there's any unacceptable behaviour. For Zoom, we'd welcome you to make any comments or chat during the presentation or towards the end where Michael's happy to take some questions. So please use the chat function, which I'll monitor. We have some forthcoming webinars that may be of interest to you, but most importantly, on the 13th of October, we have another Women in Security Awards presentation, and that will be online this time. I don't think it's 12:30 to 1:30. I think it's a bit later in the day, more like 8 o'clock. So sorry about that error, but you'll be receiving invitations and details about that on our LinkedIn posts. Molly Day will be speaking at another one of our webinars on the 22nd of October. She will be speaking about cyber threat intelligence. So you'll no doubt be very interested to hear Molly's insights. I understand she's a very highly regarded speaker. So it's wonderful that we've also got Molly on the program. On the 4th of November, we have another of our AWSN chapter leads, Bronwyn Mercer from Microsoft. She's one of the chapter leads for the Sydney chapter, and she'll be speaking on compromise recovery. And on the 17th of November, we have Eric Pinkerton, Director Trustwave. We're not quite sure what his topic will be, but it might be something to do with ransomware. I understand that's one of his areas of specialty. So keeping in touch with us, we have two LinkedIn groups. We have the private group as well as the company group. You become a member of the private group and you follow the company page. We also are quite active on Twitter, and we've been progressively providing the webinar recordings on our website at AWSN, and you can follow the links there. And of course, on YouTube, if you'd like to subscribe. I think the last time I checked, we only had 58 members subscribing on our YouTube channel. And given that we have over 3,000 members, there's room for a few more there. We have a number of platinum sponsors for which AWSN is very grateful. Women in Cyber and Cyber CX are our platinum sponsors. Bronze is ASD, the Australian Signals Directorate, part of Defence. Gold sponsors CISO Lens, AGL and Ost Cyber. And we're always grateful for these ongoing sponsors and for our event sponsors too. Thank you very much. Now, it's important that if you haven't already done so, that you go on to AWSN's website and confirm your membership. You may have some difficulty with IT security access on your work system, so you may have to do that on a private device if you haven't already done so. This is part of our governance housekeeping that we're undertaking now since we're incorporated with ASIC. Now it's over to Michael, so I'll drop out of slide sharing. Thanks very much, Michael.
Ready? First of all, I want to say hello to everyone. So great to have everybody here. I'm honored to be invited. Governance and cybersecurity is, we were just saying, it's interesting that around the world has not been a requirement in the past. I just came back from doing an audit not too long ago in Kenya, and they just put in privacy regulations, different regulations, but unless they're following ISO itself, they're not required in their country. And many countries aren't. And in the US, they just added it in November for banks as an actual requirement with listings. Canada has now have a requirement to be considering it, but not a lot of areas are doing it. Now it's only that organizations are finding out that what they thought they had governance program was just, they thought their CISO doing it was fine, that there was no overseeing needed, that everything would work properly, and that wasn't found out. So in the last year, many countries around the world have been coming up with requirements on that this is a must. So these are my certifications. You probably can't read them. Now I'm going to pull out the ones you need to know. However, I'm very proud of the fact that I am finishing my MBA in risk management this month with a 4.0 index. So very excited. And I'm finishing my MBA in information security next semester. So if you'll notice in here, I'll pull out the next slide for you. On here, the ones that if you are going to follow ISO, the international standards, if you're an international firm, you may want to do that. Doesn't matter which standards you're using, but you'll want to make sure that you have these. So ISO 27005 covers the risk management. Well, it's not just for risk managers. It covers the risk that those involved with governance are supposed to be aware of. The 27032 has a section on governance for the cybersecurity manager, things that they have to make sure are being done. So if someone's not governing them, they have to keep going back and asking. Now the ISO 38500 IT Corporate Governance Manager, the IT actually includes information security and cybersecurity under that same standard. So these are just some of them. You can take a screenshot of it if you like. I'm fine with that. So you'll see some of the information there. So we can go through that. I am going to talk a little bit about my books. I have 3 books out. The part on governance is included in the business continuity management book. So although it's written for business continuity, it does have a whole section on governance. Mastering Introduction to Cybersecurity, Mastering Work-Life Balance. I'm very excited. These are currently being sold in 30 countries. And I made an agreement with the publisher that they're available very inexpensively in every country. So I had someone say, well, how good could they be if you're not charging more? I'm not charging more because I wrote the books to give back. So I hope that they're helpful for you. So why are we even doing cyber programs? Why do people even care? The number of security incidents being reported during coronavirus have come up. Ransomware is #1 during coronavirus. Now, originally, the attackers actually, they know who they are because there's certain groups that are known for their attacks. And they actually contacted and said, well, we're not going to attack healthcare at all during coronavirus. And so the hospitals felt safe around the world. What they didn't realize is it was only those small groups were not doing that. So they were still being attacked. So the number of types of organizations being affected by incidents are higher. Now there's more focused awareness. Now they're looking at risk management strategies. And boards are changing. One of the requirements in many countries is that someone from the board needs to have a security background, or at a minimum, an IT background, to be able to work with the boards. And in many countries that it's not a requirement, it is still best practices. So I'm seeing some boards changing or adding an additional member. So the more focused it is, the more aware the board has to be of the overall risk strategies. So they don't have to be doing it or seeing the risk assessments, but they do need to be briefed minimally once a year saying, these are the risks that you have most affecting you. These are what we're doing about it. Then there's new laws and regulations that come up. Boards were not aware of them before. Neither were the CEOs or CFOs. They had lawyers taking care of that. It wasn't their responsibility. It is now. So they're realizing that the network, systems administrators, IT personnel cannot do a cybersecurity program by themselves. So that's what's been going on. What governance has to consider are legal and regulatory requirements. And I'm going to repeat a lot of this, a little bit of my background. I started teaching college when I was 24, and I've taught for many universities. I'm going to be teaching cybersecurity for lawyers for a law school in Montreal this year. So it's about teaching the lawyers how to be better advocates for advice. So the same thing is, if you are in the position, you'll want to make sure that your board knows, that your top level management knows, that's including your CEO, CIFO, CEO, understands that the cybersecurity has to meet legal and regulatory. If you decide on international standards, which I recommend, even if you're not going to be certified in it, it's great to comply with. In order to be an international standard approved, 640 countries have to agree on it. That's why it takes about 3 years for one to come out. Knowing the contractual obligations you have, many organizations are having problems because they are not having contractual agreements with their vendors for cybersecurity, for information security. And then they do have contracts that they're required to make sure they have certain things in place, and it's not happening. If you've ever gotten a letter saying you may or may not have been attacked, shame on them. They should know, and the governance should have managed this, to make sure that someone in asset management, in the cybersecurity, information security, IT, knew what data resided in what databases and what databases resided on what servers. So should or may or may not have been attacked, unacceptable. Better to hear you were attacked, at least you know their organization as well. They just didn't have the defenses in place. And internal policies. Boards weren't looking at internal policies in the past. That was under legal. When I say the past, I'm talking last year. It has changed. So what is governance? Governance describes the policies and processes organizations have to be able to detect. So whether the organization, and we'll get into resources in a moment. So whether they just detect it because they have what's called a cyber incident event management software process in place that actually tells them when something is being hit, or they have playbooks where Unix, Linux, Windows knows that something is off, or unfortunately, a customer is calling and saying, I think somebody got access to my data. So it's about how to detect it, how to prevent it, and how to respond. Now, as part of governance, the leadership has to be aware of what the incident response plans are. They have to be part of the process. Before they could say, oh, we don't know, it wasn't our responsibility, we assigned it to someone. Can't do that anymore. So if they're doing true governance programs, they have to make sure the data is safe, the network is safe, the devices are safe, and we say the people are safe. That's protecting their customers, their employees, their privacy, their data, lots of areas. So that's governance in general. 5 goals to cyber governance are making sure, and I'm using the term information security. So cyber is to make sure that the information security is not affected. They want to make sure that no one is coming into the systems, that no one is getting into a hospital system and shutting off someone's machine remotely. Last year, a company that makes pacemakers had to recall the pacemakers. They found out that they could be hacked from a cyber attack. Now they had to work with business continuity because the decisions had to be, what do we do when it's already placed inside of someone? This became a huge cyber business continuity issue combined. So you want to take a risk-based approach. You have to decide which type of risk assessment you're doing. And there's many different types, many different techniques. It's based on the size of the organization, the culture of the organization, and also the skill sets. But anything that you do from a cyber risk approach is better than nothing, anything. So you have to decide the investment decisions. Investment is what you're investing in cybersecurity. Are you making sure that your staff are certified? Are you paying enough salary that you're getting the top level people? Do you have a budget to bring in consultants? Do you have your own internal audit team trained in doing this? So it should be, all the stakeholders should feel very positive. And there should be performance reviews in relation to the business outcomes related to governance. So we were hit this year. We had attacks this year. Our program didn't work. It's going back and not just saying, well, it's the CISO's fault. Was the board aware of it? Did the board provide resources? Did the board say, no, we're not going to provide these resources this year, it's too expensive? It comes right back to the bottom line. And some of that performance relationship now goes back to the board. How well did they do? So why do we need it? Lately, there's been a lack of accountability, not enough shared ownership. The CISO has been blamed for everything. If you've noticed in the last few years around the world, the average CISO only kept their job 2 years. Anything went wrong, they were blamed before it went wrong. That's not happening anymore. So they've decided that they have to have better delivery by IT, also internal and external. Remember, your IT people are a key person in this cybersecurity defense. It's constantly changing, and are they keeping up to it? So governance is briefing the board on what events are happening that year. What are the new standards? What are this organization following? What risks did they have? What's the impact of those risks? What's the probability of those risks? And also increased awareness for management. So the governance body helps prioritize the risks. So your risk assessment is done by your cybersecurity personnel. Hopefully, they are coordinating with business continuity. Business continuity may say, this is a tier 1. We're going to bring this back in 24 hours. Cybersecurity doesn't know what's on those servers. So they don't realize if that server's been attacked, that private information is being accessed, that information actually might have classified documents on it. So now they're working together. So a good program for cybersecurity governance, they have to clearly define the risk management policies. And I'm going to go repeat everything. The reason I mentioned I've taught college for years is I repeat everything a number of times. As adults, we each hear a different way, and repeating it helps get it. So the policies have to be reviewed. The board must review those policies. It has to be signed off by leadership. And in many organizations, the board has to approve it. The strategies and the goals have to align with the business plans. So if the business is saying, we're going to come out with this new product in such and such country, but the cybersecurity rules in that country are so lax, we're going to have problems. Well, now the business decisions have to align with cybersecurity, where before it was only cybersecurity aligning with the business. Now they have to go together. And it's up to the board to make sure this is happening. So the strategy is a high-level document that establishes the roadmap for the organization to maintain and improve the overall risk management approach in cybersecurity and new products and how they're going to work together. So the policy has to be appropriate to the organization. For those of you who want to know, who are in cybersecurity looking for policy, ISO 27002. has great information on a policy, but I'm pulling out the information for several of the different ISOs, what you have to know. So it's appropriate to the purpose of the organization. It means you can't just take one that somebody else had. SANS Institute used to sell policies. 50% of my time as a consultant, 50% of my time as an auditor. As an auditor, I kept failing the policies. And they kept saying, but SANS did them. So, but they don't apply to your organization. So it has to include the objectives for the framework. Now the framework could be ISO. In the US, they use National Institute for Standards and Technology. And I've found throughout the world that a lot of people are using the NIST 800-53 framework. So it's not just a US standard anymore. It's being used around the world. It includes a commitment to continuous improvement, and it has to actually say that the board and leadership will provide continuous improvement. It has to be a documented information, and it has to be communicated with the organization and relevant parties. So governance includes the owners. There's two different areas in governance. You have the governing body, and then you have management. So under the governing body, it's distinct from management. Governance is distinct. So governing body includes owners, the board members, the partners, senior management, senior executives, and similar officers, perhaps legal, etc., could be considered part of the governing body. Management, they decide which controls are going to be in place, which processes are required to achieve the strategic objectives that the governing body set in place. Does that make sense? Okay, great. So management is subject to the policy guidance and monitoring through the corporate governance. So these are some of your key stakeholders. Senior management, they're going to approve the request for investment. More equipment, better personnel, more training, whatever that investment might be. But they have to be very clear on providing guidance on how it's going to be used and what the requirements are. The head of finance, they're involved in the cost-benefit analysis. The head of HR, they have to look at training requirements. Okay, cybersecurity says we need this. The board says we have to have the following training. So it is responsibility for the governing authorities to say, hey, CISO, hey, staff and others, this is what we want from you. And this is just a specific list of what they should be doing. And they should be feeding back the information that goes back to the board, back to the senior level executives, saying this is what we've done. So in addition to that, there's stakeholders, and governance has to consider all those stakeholders. So the unions, the shareholders, the public. Right now, we're not briefing the unions on what we're doing for cybersecurity. However, it depends on the countries. So what is the board? The board gives direction, and here's the key: backed up with adequate support and sponsorship. They can't just say, this is what we want. They have to say, and this is what we're going to do to help you. We're going to provide the following resources to you this year. These are the budgets we're going to approve. They have to insist on measurable results, metrics. So they should be saying what metrics, the board should be saying, these are the metrics we want cybersecurity to collect this year. This is the metrics that we consider most important. They have to coordinate with overseas satellite parts of the enterprise, make sure that all the interests have been considered with the boards, because what happens is different countries have different regulations. The board has to make sure all that's being taken care of. This is required under governance for cyber. And they have to create the organization structure by forming committees and establishing reporting processes. And I'm going to go through those. So they monitor performance and the risk, and they correct deviations. So when the metrics come in, they're saying, wow, these aren't good. Why? And before, boards were just saying, oh, what a shame. Well, we'll just replace the CISO. Now, maybe they don't have the right funds. Maybe the people aren't getting the right training, but they have to allow course correction now under governance. So senior leadership has to provide adequate resources. Resources are money, people, equipment, a place, locations. So it has to commensurate. So the money is a requirement now under governance. Funding has to be allocated to the highest priorities. Now, that's not to say they can't do a 5-year plan in cybersecurity, which makes sense. This is what we have to do now. Here's everybody's going to appreciate this. The funding is supposed to be based on the risk assessment that was done. So these are our highest risks this year. Now, when you're doing the risk assessment that the governance is looking at, it's not just these are the highest risks. It's this is where we're vulnerable, where we don't have controls in place, where our equipment is poor, or our network is poor. This is where we're vulnerable. And considering our vulnerability and our threat and the impact, this is what the risk is going to be, the risk factors for us. So before, the vulnerability did not have to be considered. So the metrics, again, the metrics are being provided of what metrics they want by the board. The CISO is going to have to add in additional, and they have to make sure they're measuring these KPIs. The process for this has to be repeatable. So if they say that compared to last year, this is what we have, those numbers are supposed to be accurate. So now, as part of governance, the business and IT senior managements also have a part in governance. And this is where people are forgetting that this is part of the process. So they implement the organization and necessary infrastructure that the board has said they want. They champion and collaborate with the cyber governance activities. They make sure the business strategies and objectives are set and communicated with cyber. So cyber says, that's too risky for us. We can't handle that country right now. We're not set up on infrastructure. That's too risky for us right now. There's no way for us to monitor this, this, and this yet until we do the following steps. They have to work together. So assessing the business risk and the impacts go together with the cyber. A lot of risk assessments. So if someone asked me, I did a survey 2 years ago of my clients saying, would you rather have me work on the MBA in risk management or my MBA in information security? And they're supposed to pick one. And the answers I got were yes and yes. So they go hand in hand. So I did both simultaneously. I'm scheduling my life to start next year. I'm actually excited that we had coronavirus. It gave me an excuse not to travel and made my classes easier. But what's happened is it's made cyber harder. Companies were not prepared for the number of personnel that are going to be working home. And I attended a conference with several CISOs, and they said what they do is they are encouraging people to have very good security on their home network. Encouraging? Okay, that's not a word under governance. They also didn't have requirements. And they were letting people use their home computers without encryption, without anything in place, because they had not even considered what would have to take place. Had governance been in place, that would have happened. There are two governance standards that are interesting. One of them is ISO 38500, which is information technology governance for IT in the organization that covers cybersecurity. But the other one is 38505-1. That is governance of data within the department for the CISO. And that includes making sure that people at home have everything in place. It includes a lot of these. So there are procedures in place, but they weren't utilizing them. So now governance is becoming a key area because people are coming back, stockholders, saying, we hold the board responsible. And boards are saying, whoa, wasn't our responsibility. Well, the boards may not have known it, but the stockholders did. So you will see a number of different companies that are changing their boards. You'll see a lot of people during this time with CEOs leaving. If you're following on LinkedIn, you're constantly seeing new changes. They're not leaving to go somewhere, they're leaving. I actually saw a press release the other day that a bank put down that the executive was leaving with mutual consent from the bank, which I thought was a horrible press release. It's essentially saying we wanted him to leave, but this is what's happening. So leadership principles under governance. You have to make sure that the information security policy is in place. Management systems are in place. You're communicating the effectiveness throughout all of management, that the management systems achieves its income, and it promotes continuous improvement. Now the users have responsibility. They have to take responsibility for quality assurance, regularly checking actual results against original or changed goals, and providing service feedback to the providers. These are all part of the metrics that are being kept. So what you need is governance committees. You need an IT executive committee, strategy committee. They work with the cyber services. Notice it says cyber assets. I mentioned to you about where's that database, where does it reside. If you have a SIM, which is Security Information Event Management, it's a whole system. I say a software, but it's a whole system. If you're getting a lot of false positives that's telling you something may being attacked because you didn't bother putting in, this might be too technical, but it's correlation rules. Essentially, if this happens to this server, then it's serious. If this happens, it's not serious. It can take 2 years to set those up, and people are buying the SIM software, putting it in place and thinking it's done. And so what's happening is it can take up to 2 years to put all that in place. So getting that in place, getting a data engineer as part of the process, now it comes back to resources, where they provide it. So you're supposed to have a project and program steering committee, an architect board. They help work on the SIM, the architecture, the enterprise architecture, the policies and standards, and an enterprise risk committee. So enterprise risk committee is not just dealing with business continuity, physical security, information security. Enterprise risk now includes business risk, marketing, accounting. All of the enterprise risk has to be considered under cyber now. The legal aspects have to be considered. That's why I say you may want to have legal considered one of your top executives in the governance, because they're responsible for knowing the new requirements for data protection, for privacy, for computer crimes, digital signature, intellectual properties, electronic payments. But the board is still ultimately responsible for this, and they have to know what's going on. So there's 6 principles to guide decision-making in good governance: responsibility, strategy, acquisition, performance, conformance, human behavior. So whether you're getting ready for the CISSP exam, whether you're looking at the ISO, whether you're looking at ITIL, or whether you're looking at COBIT, they all share the same 6 responsibilities, 6 different principles, and these are the 6 that are common. So responsibility is knowing who has the authority, giving the people responsible the authority to perform. In many organizations, the CISO did not have the authority to make the decisions. Now, if they're responsible, they need to have the ability to make those decisions, but they're also accountable. The board is responsible for what we covered. Leadership is responsible. So they each have their own areas of responsibility, but what's different under governance is now they're each accountable. The board is accountable. The top executives are accountable. The CISO, IT, everybody, all the way down to the users are accountable for the level that they were assigned. The strategy we're taking into, business strategies have to take into the existing IT and cyber capabilities. Can it be done now? And if not, that business strategy cannot be implemented until the cyber capabilities come up, if you're having a good governance program. Now, telling marketing they can't do something because it's too risky, telling a product line in operations they can't release a product because that product has not been properly tested for cyber, would have stopped the number of people who had pacemakers that can now be hacked, if governance had taken care of that. If they weren't in a rush to get to market and said, it's electronic, can it be a cyber? If it has any electronic capabilities, Internet of Things. Can someone hack into your refrigerator? If you have the smart refrigerator, yes. You say, well, that's no big deal. They're just going to order an extra container of milk. What do I care? It's connected to your network. And if you're at home and your refrigerator is connected to the work network and it gets hacked and you're connected to the work network, now we have cyber capabilities. That can become a product line for the refrigerator company. So all of these now are being taken into consideration. So acquisition. This is the cyber investment. Before they buy anything, the board has to say, yes, we need these. Not each and every item, but that should be put in the beginning of the year when the budgets go through. But during the year when new cyber events happen, they have to be allowed to go in for additional budget. And that's good governance, both short and long term. It's also making sure that every decision that IT, cyber buys, that there is a business justification for it, connected to the actual risk assessment. You see how that all ties together now? So performance, fit for purpose. If it is supposed to do something, is it fit for purpose? The example of what I gave you of the pacemaker, no, it was not fit for purpose. It was supposed to make people feel safe. It was supposed to help them in their processes to be able to deal with many of the areas. It should have been evaluated. There should have been direction plans for policies to ensure that it worked well. And it should be monitored. All of those are required under performance for fit for purpose. Those three areas are critical. Monitoring is also now part of the responsibility of your audit. And we didn't talk about audit before, but audit's got to come in and look at did this make sense? Are they expressing the principle in action? If it's fit for purpose, does it work with what it said it was going to do? Conformance, does it comply with all regulatory and contractual agreements that you have to meet? Again, the auditors have got to be trained specifically in governance. If not, you should be going to an external auditor to come in to help with internal audit. So human behavior, you want to make sure that there's policies, practices, and decisions have to be in respect to human behavior. That's saying employee crime, an employee who might do something, a disgruntled employee. There's cases of a head of network not having a non-disclosure agreement and giving that information to someone else. There's cases of the head of network putting a backdoor in. So if they get fired, they can come in and affect the decisions of they can affect the network, and it's happened. So taking all of that into consideration has to be considered. And also human error. All of those practices, policies, practices, and decisions have to consider those things. So there's three ways you're going to put it. We're going to be summarized. You can make it centralized. You could have it centralized, centered, that's responsible for governance, the authority and decision-making, a sole body that handles it for the entire organization, regardless of what countries they're in, for the entire organization. And they can create formal communication mechanisms. It could be decentralized. You could have different business models, different needs, different operating environments, such as mergers, acquisitions, different product lines, may have different security programs in place based on what they need. You could have a hybrid. It's making sure that the whole organization is involved in the decisions that affect the entire organization, including the business operations, who might say, we're concerned about this. It might be somebody on the line getting advice from everybody in the entire organization, even if you think it's somebody that wouldn't have a background. So regardless of level, here's your summary. You want to make sure that you link security activities to the priorities and goals. You identify the individuals at all levels. You ensure accountability for all decisions. You ensure feedback is provided to decision makers and decide a timeline. For most of my clients, we brief the board twice a year. Any approach to security governance should fit into the organization's wider approach to governance. And security has to be considered alongside other business priorities, such as health and safety or financial governance. It's just as important. And does it affect the business? Can it affect health and safety of the organization? Can it accept the financial organization, governance? Can we afford to do what we want to do? If not, we may have to stop some product lines if the security is too high.